Growing Together, a guide to community garden planning. As I mentioned earlier, I work as the agrologist and a funding program manager at Yukon Agriculture Branch, but also I'm the president of the Whitehorse Community Garden in my spare time. That ties into my personal interest in growing food and helping people grow foods be more sustainable, improve your self-security, self-sufficiency. Anything we can do about growing more food in the territory is great, because whether you're concerned about climate change or greenhouse gas emissions, or importing your food from thousands of kilometers away, if you can grow it in the backyard or near where you live, you can have fresher, more diversified food that's not been on a tractor trailer for 5 days from somewhere. And you get to pick what you want to grow as well, which gives you all sorts of interesting opportunities here. So the picture on the slide here is of our tool shed at the Whitehorse Community Garden, which I'll use as the main example of how we went about developing our community garden, which has been there for about 28 years now. And it's been very successful. Back when it started, we had a lot of people come together. There was a need within Whitehorse for people to have a place to grow food if you're living in an apartment or renting a basement suite. This is the answer. It's grown substantially over the years. We're under the Clay Cliffs on 7th Avenue by Ray Street, over by Narrow Gauge Consulting there across the street, and the P&M Recycling there in the neighborhood as well. So it's great having a tool shed this size, which was donated to us decades ago. It acts as a clubhouse at times, especially if it's raining out, we can all retreat inside. So next slide, please. So I'll give you a overview of the topics we're going to have. I've already jumped into the community garden examples. Also, I'm going to give you more of an overview on the Whitehorse Community Garden. We're going to talk about some important regulatory aspects about getting tenure. You might need insurance. There's so many things to talk about there. And when you're selecting a site, I should have location, 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 because that's very important. You need to think about that in addition to water tools, soil amendments, what you're going to do for soil fertility. And I talked about the importance of having project champions. You need more than one person. If it's only one person running the whole project, if they get a better job offer somewhere, they're gone and the project will putter and sit dormant until the next champion comes along. We're going to talk about how you work with your future gardeners. We have example gardener contracts at the Whitehorse Community Garden. I can talk about the fees we do. And once you get a site selected and permission to use it, you need to think about where am I going to get money for building infrastructure. And then I can also tell you, as the agrologist at the agriculture branch, we can test your soil for you. And I like this slide because these are my perennial scallions from the Kamchatka Peninsula collected by the University of Alaska in the 90s. And they kind of represent the topics here. Like, we can keep splitting the topics into more and more different topics that you need to know about. But it's also a great photo about being part of the neighborhood. And that's what having the community and community garden is a good example. And that's our former neighbor, Alphonse, who passed away a number of years ago. He is a great neighbor, and he was our secret source of water during the first month before the city was able to turn on the water down below. So next slide, please. Okay. Oh, there's Alphonse's boat in the background. Anyway, this is part of the Whitehorse Community Garden in the image as well. We do have a lot of raised beds of different styles, something to think about. We also have a small greenhouse, which was donated to us. We just had a call out of the blue. I believe this was built by the women in trades from the college. So it's been there for a while. And I mentioned the name Joan Craig before as being the matriarch of the garden. She had connections with people in the industry. And when we had this greenhouse there, and how are we going to get it into the garden? We have a fence. She called up a friend of a friend and said, "You guys have a crane? Could you come down here and lift this greenhouse and put it into the garden over the fence?" And it happened. So, okay, I've already talked about some of the community gardens I've seen. Some of them are active, some of them are dormant. They come in all shapes and sizes. Currently, the Whitehorse Community Garden, our site occupies 6 or 7 former residential lots under the clay cliffs, which we lease from the city of Whitehorse. And there's at least 80 beds of different styles. Some of them have collapsed after 20 years and they've been rebuilt. We've learned about different styles and what's more durable than others. Another example of community gardening would be the ground share program that George Green was offering. And he was almost doing a speed dating type thing where people had garden beds. And George would find people who wanted to garden, and he would match these people up to all these one-on-one relationships. And of course, from there, friendships evolve. People are growing something in an elderly person's backyard who's too old to garden anymore. You get a couple of young people in there gardening, and the people that own the garden, they get some benefits of surplus vegetables and that. So that's just one example of the garden matching program. I know in Porter Creek, one of the places George had set up was out by the church on the other side of the highway from Super A. They had a few short raised garden beds there. I haven't been there for a couple of years, so I assume they're still operating. I mentioned the daycares earlier. There's that one on Watson Lake that had some garden beds in their backyard. Several schools have had different garden bed projects start up. The only downside about having a community garden in a schoolyard is that no one's there in the summertime. Lots of enthusiasm in May and early June when they're starting it up, but then June, July, August, someone's got to water, weed it, and then September, we may have already had 1 or 2 frosts, and usually the crops are done by then. So but we're still trying to work with different schools around the territory. I already mentioned about the Inuvik example, how they really scored with their old hockey rink and having that corporate sponsorship, which might have been, it was either Imperial Oil or Chevron, but it was for the Mackenzie Gas Project. They did really well. This garden bed in particular is one of the ones that I putter in. It's sort of a demonstration bed. And usually I grow different crops to show people of different vegetables you can grow. Everything from 1 year I grew barley, just to remind people that yes, barley is a food for people. Our grandparents would have had barley instead of oats, most likely. And in Europe and Scandinavia, when you get porridge, it's still barley. But North America, it's oats. The reason why is because North American farmers found they could make 3 to 6 times as much money growing corn and oats than barley. So when I grew barley here, 2 of these beds, I got 3.5 kilos of barley, which makes excellent risotto. People say, well, why are you growing barley? That's animal feed. Well, no, it's people feed too. And now we have hinterland flour mills. You can buy barley chocolate cookie mix. You can buy barley pancake mix. So it's come around. People are rediscovering what we used to know so well. So those are just some of the examples. Next slide, please. Okay, if you climb up in the clay cliffs, if you're feeling bold, there is a shortcut in the back, by the way. You can take pictures of the community garden. And I used to do this every year, but I haven't for a few years. This is just the north garden to show you some of the density of garden beds. There's also a south garden down at the end, on the other side of Ray Street. And it took a lot of planning to get this up and running. It was basically abandoned lots. What happened is that, as we know, over the years, sometimes the clay cliffs are not that stable. And over the decades, over the last 100 years, there's been a number of slides more recently in certain areas. this area is fairly stable, but the people who own the lots were bought out and the lots were vacant. And so not only did the community garden find a site working with the planning department of the city of Whitehorse, it cleaned up the site because it was a lot of abandoned piles of old cement sidewalks, like all sorts of things. There were all sorts of, I'll use quotation marks and say archaeological treasures from across the Whitehorse area, and even derelict vehicles from United Keno Hill ended up in the lot there somewhere. And there's still a truck bed in the back of the south garden, the trees that people sit on occasionally there. But all sorts of things were removed, things were planted. It ended up beautifying the neighborhood outside of the garden. Along the fence where the cars are parked, there's rows of Saskatoon berries and raspberries, and we view these as community beds to give back to the neighborhood. So bring the community back into the community garden and share something back with the neighbors. Like everyone comes by, you see people picking. If you don't know what Saskatoons are, come by the garden in July, point them out to you. It's they look like blueberries, but technically they're palms, little apples, and they're very popular in the prairies. I came from the West Coast. I never tried one until I was a teenager. Never heard of them before, but anyways, they do very well in Whitehorse and southern Yukon area. Okay, so what else? I already told you about some of the history there. This image here is a great one. We used to have some very large community events, and we'll have like a harvest festival. That image was from one of our harvest festivals back when we had a gazebo on the site. And if you look in the gazebo, there might be some musicians. I believe that might be the year we had a three-piece classical orchestra there. You'll see our goddess of the harvest on the horse riding about, blessing people's crops and everything. And you can see in the foreground, we had a demonstration project on how to build portable cold frames from two 2x4s and a sheet of coroplast. So it's a great place to teach people how to do things, how to have frost protection, very much established as part of the community, and that's a goal. I was talking about location. There's a couple community gardens where people have contacted us. Like, we have two sites. Which one do you think is better? We have one that's sitting in the sun. It's got wind protection, but there's no water. Darn. And the site B is under the spruce trees, under the canopy of trees. It's like, well, you want sun on your garden, but they chose the place under the trees because the champion lived across the street and they could keep an eye on their kids there. And they got funding and they built the beds and everything, and they would run their hoses across the road. But that garden stalled out after about 4 or 5 years just because things didn't grow that well there in the shade under the trees and all the spruce needles and everything. But location is really important, and not only for sun exposure and wind protection, but you have to think about, can people access it? Is there a place to park? Can they get in? Do you have people who are mobility restricted? I was amazed at what sort of terrain those electric rascals could get through. We had two access restricted beds at the Whitehorse Community Garden, and we even had a little crossway near the ditch built out of gravel so the person get in and out. Sometimes you take a shortcut through the ditch, a shallow ditch, and just not get stuck. Just amazing. But think about community events if you have an annual festival. But yeah, I mentioned before about working with the landowners. Don't expect to have plans for a community garden in April and expect to be gardening by May. Like, you should actually be thinking a year in advance. Because to establish if you look at the back sheet from the city of Whitehorse, you can see that there's updates going on, and it sounds like in the future it might be a little more straightforward versus what the Whitehorse Community Garden did. It was like, we have an idea, let's invent a process to try and make things work. But the city acknowledges the value of food production. And yeah, the background information there. So they've worked with the Whitehorse Community Garden and learned a lot, and there's been changes over the decades as well. So good information there. Review that document. And but yeah, there's planned revisions, which will hopefully be done fall 2026, which will make the process a bit easier if people plan to come forward and to start a community garden in their neighborhood. Not every neighborhood has one. The Hillcrest one is kind of neat. It was a vacant lot, but they have permission to use it. They have a greenhouse built on the site. I think they might be running the water from the house next door, but if you're on a water meter, you'll be aware of what water costs are. Yeah, on a hot year, that can rack up to be quite a bit of money. So you need to think about financial things as well. Let's see. Once you get a site secured, you have a lease arrangement set up with the owner of the property. You have to think about the layout, garden bed design, what else? Water access. Security is an important thing as well. We learned that some people say, oh, we need a 6-foot high fence around the garden. All you really need is a 3-foot high fence. It's just so people know that, oh, this isn't a public park. There's something that they have to open a gate, go in and out, and that probably reduces any issues with people squatting there or accessing it after hours to party. Probably reduces that by 80 or 90%. If there's just any kind of a short barrier, waist high, thigh high, and a gate they have to open, it sends a psychological message like, oh, this belongs to somebody. They're doing something. It's not Rotary Park. It's a community garden, and that's been very successful. Still, once in a while, people say, "Oh, we need to have a 8-foot fence, barbed wire." It's like, no, we don't. That's just locking gates. We do have some minor issues, but having a short fencing around there will do wonders to promote it, or hedges. Water access, if you're lucky, they'll have water in the area, maybe in an adjacent building. If you have a water meter, like the Whitehorse Community Garden does, your water bill would probably be $300 or $400 a year, maybe $500. But mind you, we have about 80 beds and up to 100 garden members there, because we also have nonprofit organizations, some groups that have quite a few people. I think this year, and over the years, we've had community groups like, let's see, Scum Friendship Center, Victoria Faulkner Women's Center. We've had Whitehorse Elementary. We've had the addictions unit have a bed there. We've had Queer Yukon had a bed there a couple years. The Golden Age Society was helping with a couple beds. Another good thing to mention about having a community garden is that if you have surplus food, there's a program called Plant a Row, Grow a Row. It's a Canadian program. We just call it Plant a Row. And depending on the volunteer base and the interest of garden members, we have had very active food donation programs. A couple of years, we donated over 1,000 pounds of produce to the Golden Age Society and hundreds of pounds to the Whitehorse Food Bank in some years. But it depends on who the volunteers are to look after the beds and who the volunteers are to have a weekly gathering of surplus food from people's garden beds. And since people can't always be there, we developed a system where you have wooden stakes and they have PAR for Plant a Row, and they're painted purple. We tell people if you have too much lettuce, most people plant 5 times the amount of lettuce they need. So just go to the bucket in the tool shed, get a PAR stake, put at the end of the row of your lettuce, and the volunteers will know to come by and pick maybe a quarter of that row. They'll gather it, clean it up, put it to bags, and then there'll be another volunteer. I have a photo at the end, I think, of they'll deliver it to the site, or we'll get the people such as Golden Age Society like last year to come to the site on Friday morning, and the volunteers are there, pick up the delivery in milk crates. And that's great. Next slide, please. Yes. So I like this one, and I can use this slide because that's my son who's taller than I am now with the shovel. So before you put the shovel in the ground, before you let the horse out of the barn, make sure you've got all your lease agreements, if you require insurance, it's a good idea. You need to have all those things dealt with. And yeah, I've touched on that quite a bit already. I even talked about, see the handout from the city of Whitehorse. I believe that'll probably be posted, linked to this document somehow at the end. I'll leave that up to Taryn and Devin to look after that. And this was another one of our harvest festivals. And yeah, again, we had another harvest queen on the horse. Yeah, we actually, looking back, this is at least looking at my son maybe 17, 18 years ago. I don't think we checked on the horse issue about if any permits were required, but I do know that part of our community garden used to be a part of the Whitehorse or the White Pass pasture when they used to take the carriages up to Dawson on the winter road. They'd take them down to the south garden and they'd graze their horses in the meadow there. We have such a lush field of quack grass and brome grass there, just from the leftover bales of hay that they fed the horses. But anyways, for a few hours, it was a nice event. And again, lots of food. There's probably some Saskatoon pies in there, and having it by the garden shed, it really makes it part of the community. But I couldn't resist this photo because it just talked about, make sure you have dot the I's and cross the T's. And yeah, next slide, please. Final slide. So it's talking about the Plant to Rural program and what do you do with your surplus produce. Like if you have a very small community garden for a daycare, a school, the food bank, the church, you're going to have surplus food. And if you use it with your own group, that's great. If you have surplus, learn about the Plant to Rural program, contact a group that could use some food donations. It's not charity, it's just sometimes people don't have opportunities or locations to grow food, and this is a good way to do it. So this used to be every Tuesday or Wednesday night, and last year I think it was every Friday morning. And we had some volunteers who kept amazing records every year. Like the record we set was 1,400 pounds one year, about 5 years ago. And I got a table of every vegetable type and the weekly amounts gathered and the totals at the end of the season. And it'd be like 35 pounds of Swiss chard, 40 pounds of kale, and just one by one, but just an amazing amount of food. And yeah, people really appreciate it, and it's great. So what else do you need for your garden when you're planting a garden? Talked about bed design. If you want tips on bed designs, you can always set up a time to visit the Whitehorse Community Garden. We've tried quick, cheap beds. We've done heavy-duty beds. Sometimes it takes a bit more money, but some beds last 10 years, some last 20 years. It depends how they're built. To think about how you're going to get your gardening tools. You're going to need hoses, wheelbarrows. You're going to need shovels, rakes, and you're going to need somewhere to put them. It's really important. You need to think about in your community garden, how are you going to garden? At the Whitehorse Community Garden, we decided we're going to grow organically, but we're not trying to be certified organic. So on our annual gardener's contract, the final page says, here's a list of soil amendments suitable for organic gardening. We don't enforce it, but if we do spot somebody with a jug of blue water and a milk jug, people will stop them. They're like, what are you doing? It's the same as the pink water. You can have brown water, that's different. That's compost tea. Although you'd be amazed at how many people get upset if you pick their water barrel, because they're all over the garden, they get filled with hoses, and you use theirs to make compost tea. I think I did that once in the middle, and I had like 5 emails within 5 days. Like somebody threw a bag of manure in my water, but it's like it says compost tea is fertilizer. Like, no, put it somewhere else. It's like whatever. You can't make everybody happy, but we try. Yeah, soil amendments and have a site for making compost, but don't bring in a load of fresh manure. You have to think about your neighbors. You want to get your soil tested. If you go on the Yukon government website and look at soil testing, you'll find out that every gardener is allowed one free soil sample per year. Bring it into our office. The webpage has instructions how to sample. We'll send it out to a laboratory down in Alberta and get you test results in 2 or 3 weeks. Just don't fertilize and then sample, because all we can do is tell you did a good job fertilizing or you fertilized too much. Sample before you do anything. Do it at the end of the season. That's probably the best time. So that way, get your results 2 or 3 weeks later. You've got all winter to think about how am I going to improve my soil next year. Right now, this week, we've already had about 4 or 5 people come into our office. I need the results right away. I'm planting next week. Well, sorry. It has to go out to Alberta. It takes 2 or 3 weeks, unless you want to pay for the courier yourself. So also think about how you can decide who can sign up for the garden, what's it going to cost, are you going to have gardener contracts, how are you going to organize your volunteers? I'd suggest a weekly work be at a set time. So it depends on the size of your group. At the Whitehorse Garden, we have usually it's like a Wednesday early evening after work one. Some people say, well, I can't make it on a weekday. Can you have it on the weekends? But then we need more volunteers to work with the volunteers. So we do what we can. And if you're after funding, if you're a registered not-for-profit society, that's one of the gold tickets to applying for funding from different sources, lotteries, Yukon, CDF. The agriculture branch has a community garden program as well. There's all sorts of funding opportunities out there. Again, think about it ahead of time. Apply for funding months before you need it. Yeah, good plan. And obviously big money to get your garden beds built. And coincidentally, this is my final slide. And we're going to move into questions and Q&A, see what we have. We'll do questions from the people in the room here, and we'll alternate with online questions. Devin. So does anyone have any immediate questions here in the room?
I have a really boring question.
Okay.
When I was looking into insurance for my other not-for-profit that I had for a couple of years, I was really had a lot of challenges. Like when I actually looked into what the insurance actually covered, it was actually like not it would get me what I needed, but the actual insurance itself wouldn't help us if something happened. So anyways, I was just wondering if you had any tips specifically related to a community garden, like with the insurance broker, like what you kind of do to get that insurance.
It takes a lot of shopping around because different policies cover different things, but you want to have, I think we have 3 styles of insurance. We have general liability insurance in case people get hurt on site. Currently, if you're on a city lease, they're asking for $5 million coverage. I think that's on their fact sheet as well. Mm-hmm. Also, we have board insurance. So you want to look after the board members and the board. And since we have the beehives in the community garden, I have beehive insurance that I take out personally as the beekeeper. So we've never had to test any of our insurance policies, but it's good to have it. And it's for peace of mind. And if you want to get a lease in a municipal area, you'll have to have that. And if you're after a lease from a private landowner, they might request that as well. But yeah, any sort of not-for-profit society, definitely you want to have some sort of coverage there. But it's been getting pricey the last 10 years. It's like every year, whether it's car, home, board, it's been going up and up and up. we have any online?
We do, yeah. So it's a question about water. Is there any chance that the city would consider putting in water access, or do we need to find a private neighbor willing to hose it over?
Both, if possible. The Whitehorse Community Garden, we have a water main which gets turned on usually the end of May. It ties into when the frost is out of the ground. So some years it's not until the beginning of June. So what happens in the meantime is one of those earlier slides I had, we had Alphonse gave us permission. Actually, he did it himself. He just hooked up his hose and he hung it over the fence. So we'd line up all the water barrels along his fence and fill them up. I think, I'm not 100% certain, I think Hillcrest might do something like that as well, unless they have a water meter on there. But it's case by case and site by site. And sometimes there's other opportunities. If you know people with a water truck, you could have them swing by during May. I've got to get on that today or tomorrow. We always have really early gardeners out there, and right now they pretty well need to bring milk jugs and blue barrels of water themselves, like the big blue water jugs for camping. And but usually we have the water main turned on, and there's 2 standpipes in the garden which we run hose to, and we fill all the water barrels around the garden. Because you don't want people just running the water on their own independently. They might leave it on. There might be an accident. Maybe things get stripped. We have designated people who hook up the hoses and fill the barrels. And we have meters on our water mains. We pay the city of Whitehorse an annual fee for that based on volume. But yeah, as many ways as you can. Yes.
More of a comment in case I had to leave. But if anybody else, Copper Ridge, I'm on the Copper Ridge Neighborhood Association, and we're got a subcommittee started to work on a community garden and site identified. So give me my contact information.
Awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of people up in Copper Ridge. I can see that as a future area. And you've already been talking to the city? Perfect.
Yeah, but I didn't know about the lease. So that's very information about the changes. So it will be slower than we thought.
Yeah, for reference for garden fees, the Whitehorse Community Garden now charges $50 a year per bed. For the first 15 years, we had $20 per person per bed, plus a $20 deposit for all sorts of other things, tools, going towards water and everything. And then if people left the garden, they could ask for it at the end of the season. But sometimes people never would, so that sort of slowly added. But we thought, why keep it so complicated? We just made it $50 because, with water insurance, all those things have been going up over the years. So we kind of run at a break-even amount with that, but then having beds as our only source of income. And if we have any construction projects, then we go to the grants at that point. But I know some community gardens down south charge a lot more money. And there's even the deluxe model that there are farmers I've heard of down south who will rent out part of their market garden and call it a community garden. And depending on what you pay, either you can do the bare bones one and come and plant your own crops, or you can pay him and he will plant rows of all the vegetables he's doing next door. And then you just have to pay, and then you come and harvest them when you want. And he waters them and he fertilizes them. That's the deluxe one. That's several $100s a year. But some people want it that easy. You can go by there, look at it. Yeah, another couple of weeks, kids will come back and pick some cabbages and turnips and radishes and carrots. Yeah. Other online question that we have one.
Vandalism. What has been the experience of community gardens in residential areas in Whitehorse, and what factors tend to affect the extent of vandalism?
Very good question. And last year was, well, it varies from year to year. You never know if you're going to have people stealing things. Sometimes people steal things because they need things. Sometimes they're just lazy and they're hungry at the same time and they'll just pick what they see. Sometimes they actually don't understand that what's in the garden beds belongs to somebody who's renting that and they're tending that themselves. I actually met a lady leaving the community garden one year with a box of vegetables. And I'm like, oh, are you new here? Like, I don't recognize you. She goes, no, I just live down the next street. This is so great you have us. We come and get food for whenever we want. It's such a great thing. And tell all my neighbors, I'm like, let me explain how this works. And she felt really guilty. She goes, well, should I like plant these vegetables back in the ground? Or like she felt really bad. I said, no, they're going to go limp before the owner comes back. But learn from this and tell other people, just like, this is like, that person paid $50 and that person did. But there are, what we did find is that if there's a unofficial tent city forming in the forest near your community garden or on a vacant lot, sometimes those people will want to go shopping. And we noticed last year there was a couple tents down 7th Avenue towards the lumber yard, and vegetables were disappearing every few nights. Like, why go down to Superstore to steal something when there's a garden right there? So it's usually ripe things. So that's the reason I stopped growing carrots in my own garden bed, because that's probably the number one choice thing to eat on the fly. Grab a few when you're walking by. So I started growing things like Swiss chard and kale. And a lot of people steal that. But if you do have, say, an abandoned house nearby, you'll notice vandalism will pick up a little bit and theft. But as I mentioned earlier, if you have a short fence, even a waist-high fence, it's a psychological barrier too that most people won't just go through, because if they're in the garden hanging out, someone goes, hey, those are ripe, they're going to try some. But if they don't think it's a public space, like we're part of the community, but it's more the neighbors and they're invited in. And but if there's strangers coming by, teenagers can be a problem. But that's the same everywhere, Just like when we're all younger and there's an apple tree right down the street, what's 1 or 2 apples? But it has some years been more of a problem. And one year we had some, if they take 1 or 2 things, that's one thing. But if they're harvesting entire rows, that's not cool. And we've had it happen to people, or people would steal potatoes from a part of the row and then go to all the trouble to put the plants back on type and put the soil on top and pretend they're there. And people show up. It's like, why is my potato plant wilted? It's like, oh, because they've all been harvested. Like some people are just like that, unfortunately. But usually it's not a big issue. But last year was enough of an issue. I had to go to city bylaws to flag it, and to RCMP and open a file to get more drive-bys, keep an eye on the property. Yeah, okay. Too bad we can't grow grapes here.
I know, my seeds right here.
Okay, any other questions in person, or should we go back online?
I've got one more about
Yes.
food forest versus a conventional community garden. And I know, because I know there's some, you've got the berry bushes and stuff. Any lessons from that? And do you think that maybe having more food forest health things might kind of offset some of the issues you're talking about? Or
It does help, and that's something to think about. What a lot of people think about when they go to plant gardening is just annual vegetables. Think about the perennials, like that shot of the scallions I have there. So right now at the community garden, people, they're just thinking about planting things, but the onions are already 6 inches tall. So it's like rhubarb. Everyone thinks, oh, perennial vegetables, rhubarb. Plant it once and you're set for decades. There's also French sorrel. There's chives, perennial scallions. And then you get into berry bushes. So all your different berries, now you're getting into perennial shrubs. So not only just food forests, like we don't have the large fruit trees, nut trees that you'd see in a food forest book, like the one over on the table there. But we do have Saskatoons. We do have, I don't think anyone actually plants high bush cranberries. There's so many of them out there anyways. But Saskatoons, you can do quite a bit. Pascaps will get 4 or 5 feet tall. There's lots of berries you can plant, and which is more of a Yukon style food forest. And it makes work a lot easier. If you space them apart, you can plant in between them. So the food forest goes more into that whole discussion on permaculture, where you have a blend of annual, biennial, perennial, shrubby, and possibly tree varieties all interplanted in what they call clades, or groups of plants that will grow harmoniously. Some plants won't grow with other types of plants. Some of them hate each other, some of them love each other. So companion planting is a part of that. But pick up a book on permaculture too, and work in some of the perennials. We also have some ornamental perennial onions. Like in addition to the scallions, we have a purple flowered variety that is edible, but they're more showy and they have flat leaves like garlic chives, but they're about this tall right now, and they show up in different parts of the garden as well. But if you're after, when you get your garden up and running, give me a shout at the Ag Branch. I can give you some transplants from the Whitehorse Community Garden. Because quite often at the end of the year, we have our seed saving workshop. People who don't appreciate onions, say, will be digging them up and throwing in the compost pile. So we have the seed saving workshop. I also take the tour over to the compost pile, and there's all sorts of perennials in there that are still alive, and people take them home in bags and plant them. But we can probably find a couple patches to dig up and do them over.
And did you plant all of that at the same, like when you started the garden, or did that?
Gradually over the years. Some of it was involved with grant money. Sometimes it's seed from universities or other people, like we have the EMR Seed Library. And there are some annuals that grow so vigorously they self-seed, and which makes it even easier. It's almost like a perennial, but not quite. Yeah. Oh, we have about 5 minutes left. Any other online or yes, or in person?
Go ahead, online person.
Yeah, they wanted to ask, talk about theft, but they wanted to specifically ask about vandalism in the garden.
Not so much vandalism, like we haven't had problems with graffiti. The biggest issue we had was the worst kind of vandalism is stupid vandalism. Like our tool shed has windows on it, there's 2 windows. You could look inside and see what's there or not there. Somebody took a crowbar and pried the shed door open, pried the hasp and lock off, and then went inside, and it's like, oh, there's nothing good here. Well, if you'd looked in the window, you could have saved yourself some time. And now we've got to replace, the lock was still good. It's still hanging on the piece of metal with the screws on the other side. But so that was one of the worst case scenarios. But we haven't had people just say coming in to break things, or we did have one individual over the years, an interesting, colorful, elderly gentleman who had come by most of the beds growing carrots, and he'd pull one out to examine it thoughtfully, carefully, then lay it on the railing of the bed and go down and do something else. And people are pulling up my carrots one by one and just putting them on the edge, and then they wilt and no one gets to eat them. So technically that's vandalism, but I think he was seriously monitoring the progress of our growing techniques. Just, but yeah, that break-in was probably the worst thing, or the first times I've seen that. That was file number 2 for the RCMP. We just said we need to have better padlocks, but oh well. Yes.
Hi. I'm up in Tikini, and there's 3 or 4 of us who are organizing ourselves into reviving and relocating a community garden, because there was a community garden near Bumblebee Park that is covered in spruce trees and poplars.
That's the playground.
The playground, yeah, it's a lovely spot, but it's useless for growing. So we're relocating, and we're doing fine. We're incorporating. The Takini Neighborhood Association doesn't want us; they're too busy with other things, so we're incorporating, and that's fine. As I'm reading through the regulatory overview, I was a little bit dismayed to see that the city will not accept any new lease applications until autumn 26. Is there anyone here who can elaborate on that?
Yes,
Hi.
Jacob.
Hi, Jacob. Oh, Jacob. I'm Linnea.
Oh, yes. So her council has decided that we are going to rewrite the governing text that deals with leases, among other things, in the city of Whitehorse. And unfortunately, fall 26 is the fastest we can move on that, because we're going to be getting a consultant to help us out with it. I don't know if there's a process where we could entertain a lease in the meantime. I've been advised that any lease renewals will be going into overhold status, which is fine. All our leases are built to do that. But in terms of could we accept a new lease tomorrow, my guess is no. But we may have some legal framework I'm familiar with that we could do it by. One of the main outcomes of that rewrite that I'm hoping for is an easier process for community gardens. That may look like an ability for us to administratively approve them rather than sending them to council, which takes a lot of time. That may look like further reductions in fees. And it would be really nice if we could figure out a way to lower the insurance requirements, because it's currently at $5 million, which I think translates to $2,500 a year, I'm guessing, around there. So cost.
About 1,200.
1,200, yeah. So just kind of things like that. That will be a public process, and existing community gardens will be contacted for their input on our rewrite of that, but we really can't move forward on anything until that happens. But the flip side of that is once it's in place, I think life is going to be a lot easier for both us administratively and the community gardens looking to get up and running.